look at that crust. That is flavour. Now that's a perfectly cooked rump steak. Let's get into it. Today we are cooking rump steak and keeping it tender. Cooking time for this recipe is less than 10 minutes. And for those of you who love to use my beer timer, you're looking at a 1 beer cook. Cheers. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share, it all helps. For this recipe, we're going to need some rump steak. As always, I dropped in to see Mick out at Gippsland Premium Meats, and I grabbed this 584 gram rump steak while I was there. Now, rump is a hard-working muscle. You know why? Because it comes from the cow's twerking region. Now, although it has a super strong beefy flavour, it can also be a tougher cut of steak to work with. So we need to fix that in a way of tenderising the meat. Today we're going to be using a natural enzyme to help break down the protein and the connective tissue. We just need to be careful we don't overdo it, or our steak will turn to mush. Now, there are a lot of ways to tenderise meat. There's a Chinese way of velveting meat, using baking powder and cornstarch. But this does tend to leave an aftertaste on larger cuts of beef like steak. It's okay for stir fries. Or there's beating the steak with a tenderising hammer. Although this is effective in tenderising the meat, it also creates a very thin steak, which is easy to overcook. Then there is the right way, the natural way, using kiwi fruit. More specifically, the natural enzymes that occur in a kiwi fruit. Now this part couldn't be any easier. Roughly chop up 3 kiwi fruit and then pop them into a blender, blitz them up, yep, skin and all. This isn't an issue as we'll be washing it off afterwards anyway. Now just add half of the kiwi smoothie to a container, place the steak in and cover with the rest of the kiwi fruit, making sure it all gets covered. Pop the lid on and we're going to pop this aside and allow those enzymes to do their job. The steak has been soaking in the kiwi fruit for an hour, so it's time to rinse it off. And I didn't think you needed to see me wash it off. There are these things inside every house called taps. Use the cold water one, wash it off thoroughly, dry it off, done. Now you don't want to leave the steak in the kiwi fruit for much longer than an hour, any longer than that, and it will start to turn it into mush. And once fully rinsed off, pat dry with some paper towel. And as you can see, the kiwi fruit's changed the colour and it's actually plumped up the steak and it feels so much softer already. And once it's all dried off, we can start to season our steak. And I like the bold, beefy flavours of rump steak to shine through. So I like to keep it simple. So I prefer to use an SPG seasoning or salt, pepper, garlic. Sergeant Seasoning on board for action. Enemy acquired, prepare the salt. Enemy advancing, reloading with pepper. They just won't stop, finishing off with garlic. Now don't be cheap, season both sides of the steak, or only half the steak's going to taste good. And now that the steak is fully seasoned and ready for some action, it's time to get cooking. For those wondering, my SPG ratios are 60% salt, 30% black pepper, and 10% garlic powder. Don't forget to put your grill on carefully. Look, I'm sorry, it's become a habit now. Now before we get started, I'd like to thank Weber for sponsoring this video. Although they didn't sponsor it, so I can't thank them.
I sense some hostility here.
In fact, it is a total fire ban here today, so that means no combustible fuels are allowed. So I'll be using this cast iron pan to cook on today. And to be 100% honest, it's the best way to create a nice crust on any steak. And I'll be pairing it up with my portable gas stove. Just place the pan over a high heat and get it really hot. Once you can feel the heat radiating off the pan, we're going to turn down the gas and we're going to grab some avocado oil and put some of that in there, allowing that to heat up for about 30 seconds. And then we're going to add the steak into the pan and we're going to lay it away from us to stop any of that fat splashing up at us. And let that cook away for 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, we're going to flip the steak and add 50 grams of unsalted butter. And we're going to cook this for another 2 to 3 minutes. And I'll keep an eye on the temp with an instant read thermometer, and I'm going to remove it once it hits 55 degrees Celsius. We have hit our target temp, so onto the board we go. And we're going to let that rest. And although I removed it at 55 degrees Celsius internally, our target temp was 57 degrees Celsius internally, or a perfect medium rare. Now, while resting the steak, the internal temp will keep rising a couple of degrees, and it should settle on that perfect 57 degrees Celsius that we're aiming for. The amount of time we rest our steak is dependent on its weight. It is recommended it's 1 minute per 100 grams, and this was nearly 600 grams, so we're going to let it rest for 6 minutes. Our steak will not rapidly start to cool down while resting it. It is only when we cut into it, it'll start to rapidly cool down. But by resting our steak, we are ensuring the end product is a lot more tender and moist. Smart. Resting time is over. We can now slice into the steak and test it for taste and tenderness. Now our muscle fibres are running lengthways down the steak, so to ensure we get a nice tender chew, we need to cut across the grain. And look at that. Perfectly cooked, medium rare. And look at that, perfectly pink and super moist. Juicy, tender steak not cooked like this. Now that should be illegal.